The Tower of Belém was built to guard the harbour at Lisbon. At its centre, watching over the gun platform, sits the patron whose favour the Portuguese explorers most valued. The Virgin Mary's fortified gun tower was built when mastery of the sea had made Portugal rich and confident. With their new wealth, Portugal's kings built monasteries and churches and decorated them with emblems of seafaring. The walls are covered with a crazy profusion of seaweed and barnacles and nautical knots. Strange decoration for a church. Even stranger, scientific instruments now began to appear in about 1500 on religious buildings. In recent years, navigation had improved rapidly, and ships were being built which for the first time could sail into the wind and ride out the ocean storms. Man suddenly thought he knew where he was going, and he even had a chance of getting there. In a space of less than 5 years, his idea of the planet he lived on was to alter radically. With their new skills, the explorers would not only import the spices and the gold, but would also export Christianity. This great stone ship, a modern monument to the Portuguese explorers, stands proudly on the shore at Lisbon from which they once set sail. On board are the soldiers, merchants, and adventurers, and on even the most dangerous expedition, the priests, sailing in what was to lead to the greatest and most profitable expansion of the Roman Catholic Church. Anyone alive in Europe in the 1480s was about to hear two pieces of news in rapid succession, which were as startling then as the first landing on the moon to us. At that time, this was the whole known world. To the west, nothing but sea stretching to unknown distances. And to the east, the difficult and dangerous landmass on the long route towards China. But in 1488, a Portuguese ship sailed down the west coast of Africa and then continued on round the southern tip, round the Cape of Good Hope. And suddenly there was a new hope, a new easy sea route to the east, with its rich spices for the merchants and its infidels that the priests might convert to Christ. And then 4 years later, there was an even more astonishing event. A ship sailed, on this occasion from Spain, with Columbus as its captain, into the unknown seas. On this map, one is tempted to coin a phrase. It may look a few small steps for a man, but it was one big step for mankind. Or at any rate, for the European and Christian part of mankind, the Indians who are living here already may not have been quite so pleased. The discovery of America shifted the advantage of the times from the Portuguese, who had sailed mainly east, and gave it to the Spanish. They sailed west with the familiar mixed motives, idealism and greed, a fact proudly acknowledged by the greatest of Spain's conquistadors, Cortés.
I am embarking upon a great and beautiful enterprise, which will be famous in times to come, because I know in my heart that we shall take vast and wealthy lands. I need hardly mention how pleasing it will be to God our Lord, for love of whom I have willingly offered my toil.
But ahead of Cortés and the Virgin Mary, 7,000 miles away over the sea, was a land the very existence of which was still unknown to Europeans. In Mexico, there was a culture more ancient even than Christianity. Here, other gods ruled the universe, among them Xochipilli, lord of the flowers. Xochipilli was a cheerful god, and Mexicans still enjoy an afternoon among the flowers at the very site where he was worshipped. But there was a dark side to Mexico's gods, like the sting in the tail of this ancient Mexican poem.
Certain it is that all upon earth are believing. Ah, only a moment the beautiful flowers blossom before thee, O maker of life. Flowers of thy hand, sweet-scented flowers, lend them a while to the earth. Perhaps we shall carry them with us there to thy house. We must go and leave them with the flare of skin.
In the harsh landscape of ancient Mexico, the flare of skin was very much at home. This was a world which was kept in balance only with the help of more than 40 gods. Deep in the center of the country was the birthplace of the gods, the first great temple city of Mexico, Teotihuacan, which means City of the Gods. This was a busy and important place 20 centuries ago, at the time of Christ. Its two chief monuments are the Pyramid of the Moon and the even more massive Pyramid of the Sun. It was believed that the gods had created the sun here, but the sun refused to move. It needed blood, and so the gods gave it their own. At that stage in Mexico, the blood of the gods was enough to keep the sun going, to bring him up each dawn after the dark night. That pleasant theory was good enough for Teotihuacan, which seems to have been a peaceful place. But this city fell to tribes with more violent ideas, and eventually the whole of central Mexico was in the hands of the Aztecs, and they believed in a more literal method of supplying the sun's needs. The Aztecs offered the sun men's hearts. Now only human blood would get him up in the morning. But when the sun did rise, that only proved the sacrifice had worked, and he'd need more hearts tomorrow. And so the vicious circle continued. In 1 year of bad omens, 1487, more than 80,000 human hearts were needed and obtained to keep the sun going and to make him strong. It was a world in which the value of human life increasingly came to seem a matter of small importance compared to the demands of the gods. This massive figure is one of a group of warriors who once supported the roof of a temple here at Tula, some centuries before the Aztecs took over. By the time the Spaniards arrived in Mexico, the Aztec ceremonial year was one grisly round of human sacrifice. Children were drowned to please the rain god. Women danced in the temple knowing that as they did so, their heads would be slashed off. Prisoners were flayed so that the priests could dress up in their skins. And above all, there was the terrible thirst of the sun. Cortes and his Spaniards would almost certainly have been sacrificed to the sun, but for one of history's most amazing coincidences. One of the gods of ancient Mexico was Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent. He was a peaceful god, god of the wind, god of agriculture. He was shown in many forms, and it was he who had brought knowledge to man down a ladder from heaven. There was a legend that this peaceful god had been driven out of Mexico, but that he would return in one particular year of the Mexican calendar, a year which fell in 1519. He'd have a pale skin and a black beard, much like Cortes. In that very same year, 1519, Cortes landed with 500 soldiers and 16 horses. He did have certain advantages. The Indians had never seen a cannon, nor the terrifying sight of a rearing horse. But these weapons would have been useless against the army of many thousands that the Aztec emperor Moctezuma might have sent against the Spaniards. Instead, he sent Cortes presents, and he'd given his men careful instructions.
If it is really Quetzalcoatl, greet him on my behalf and give him these gifts. Provide him also with all kinds of food, cooked birds and game and fruit. Notice very carefully whether he eats or not. If he eats and drinks, he is surely Quetzalcoatl, and this will show that he is familiar with the foods of this land, that he ate them once and has come back to savor them again.
For the first time, the Europeans tasted turkey. They set to with gusto. Clearly, Quetzalcoatl had returned. But he, or Cortes, kept marching on towards Moctezuma's palace, on the site of what is now Mexico City. On the long march inland, Cortes had won many allies, other Indian tribes who resented the fierce rule of the Aztecs. But whatever the impression given by heroic Spanish paintings, Mexico was won not by pitched battles, but by trickery, carried through admittedly with amazing courage, and helped by the indecision of Moctezuma himself, who thought he might be dealing with a god. Moctezuma invited the Spaniards into his city. Cortes saw his chance. He took the emperor prisoner in his own palace and ruled through him as a puppet king. There was continual danger of violence. Moctezuma himself died during a riot. But within 2 years, the small group of Spaniards had won control over this vast country. And now it was the turn of the priests. Cortes's own chaplain described later how their work was first made possible by the success of the soldiers.
Truth to tell, it is war and warriors that really persuade the Indians to give up their idols, their bestial rites and abominable sacrifices, and only then do they, of their own free will and consent, more quickly receive, listen to, and believe our preachers and accept the gospel and baptism, which is what Christianity and the faith consist of.
When you've conquered a huge country at such speed and with so few men, you need garrisons and castles to hold it down. This building at Acolman, not far from Mexico City, was begun within 20 years of the conquest. It looks like a fort, with its massive walls and its lack of windows. In fact, it's a church, built for a convent of Franciscan friars and deliberately placed near Teotihuacan, the birthplace of the Mexican gods. The church was the largest and the most important building in each new Spanish settlement. It was also the obvious place for the European minority to shelter in a crisis. The richly ornamented west front could be anywhere in Spain, except for the roofline, which reflects the possibility of an uprising here at Acolman. It was designed so that cannon could peep out from between the battlements. In the end, no shot was fired. It wasn't needed because the spiritual conquest of Mexico had been almost as rapid as the military one. In no time at all, the priests were baptizing Indians in vast numbers. One friar even claimed 200,000 baptisms to his own hand. 14,000 of them, he said, in a single day. Admittedly, the Indians may often have been baffled by much of what they were being taught. To give an extreme example, there was one friar who spoke no local language, but who traveled from village to village exhibiting large paintings of heaven and of hell. To add to the cautionary effect of hell, he had with him a portable oven in which he roasted live cats and dogs. Their cries, he considered, would have a very moral effect, and no doubt his audience was riveted. But there were many friars who did make considerable efforts to try and understand the local people and their local ways. In order to do so, they learnt their languages. They even tried as far as possible to join in an Indian way of life, so as to bring Christ more fully home to his new converts. Above all, they were eager to prove that Christianity was a gentle religion. But here they came up against one immediate problem: how to represent the crucifixion. The new god that the Spaniards brought with them showed every sign of being a sacrificial victim. It was difficult to present this image as a total change from Mexico's own rivers of sacrificial blood. The newly baptized Indians would often hide statues of their own gods behind the altar, praying for safety's sake to the old and the new together. Inevitably, they were confused by this new religion. But the friars gradually made progress. Sometimes they used catechisms to explain the faith, done in cartoon form, with words from the Indians' own language. And with a Christian God appearing rather strangely as a friendly snowman. There was one thing that the Indians and the church had in common, a love of ceremony and festivity. The Aztec year had been full of popular festivals. The friars replaced them very successfully with Christian alternatives. The very theme of heathens being converted by Christians provided one of the best loved of the new festivals. At the hands of the Christian conquistadors. Here, the leader of the Moors makes one of his many threats to kill the Christians. Fighting lasts for 7 hours. When the dance is finally over, the Moors will have all been baptized by the Christians. To Mexicans today, the word Moor just means anyone who is unbaptized. The Spanish conquest of Mexico had led to many confusions. None was so dangerous as the cross. It even caused 2 girls to be crucified inside a church by a native priest who was tragically confused.
Let these girls die crucified, as did Jesus Christ, who they say was our Lord. But we do not know if this is so.
So as to be certain that the Indians could not see the crucified Christ as their own sort of human sacrifice, the clergy in Mexico came up with a remarkable solution. An almost entirely abstract cross, beautifully decorated, with no blood, no mangled flesh, no body even. With arms outstretched as if in blessing or greeting, the cross itself has become the body of the God, a very wise and peaceful God, and rightly lamented, or so it seems, by this long-suffering Indian peasant. She says a lot, this lady, about what many of the friars increasingly came to see as their real vocation in Mexico, to protect the innocent new Christians, the Indians, from the Christians who had conquered them. After the conquest, each Spaniard had been given a grant of land and a number of Indians to work it. But the conquistadors were tough adventurers. They treated their Indians as slaves. The leader of those who protested was a Dominican, Bartolomé de las Casas. And 14 times he crossed the Atlantic, back and forth between New Spain and Old Spain, to win protection for the Indians. Rome was very sympathetic to his case. So was Madrid. But it was the usual colonial situation. People sitting comfortably in Europe passed liberal laws to protect the Indians. The colonists merely disregarded them. Las Casas tried refusing the sacrament to any Spaniard who still owned Indian slaves. So no Spaniards came to his church. More effectively, Las Casas published an account of Spanish atrocities against the Indians, which was later illustrated with lurid engravings. Most Spaniards, particularly in Mexico, refused to accept this version of the conquest, but there were some who supported his allegations.
Spaniards have committed such cruelties that the Indians, far from believing us to be Christians and children of God as we boasted, could not even believe that we were born on this earth, or sired by a man and born of a woman. So fierce an animal, they concluded, must be the offspring of the sea.
Back in Spain, the question of Spanish brutality caused mounting concern. At Valladolid, the argument reached its climax in a famous debate. The King of Spain had banned all future conquest until a just policy towards the Indians could be found. In this college of St. Gregory, Las Casas had to listen to those who thought the Indians little better than animals.
The Indians are as inferior as children are to adults, as women are to men. They are as different from Spaniards as cruel people are from mild people. Compare those blessings enjoyed by Spaniards of prudence, genius, magnanimity, temperance, humanity, and religion with those of the Indians, in whom you will scarcely find even vestiges of humanity.
In a lengthy and often academic defense of the Indians, Las Casas offered one simple moral statement.
All the races of the world are men. The entire human race is one.
They do not know that they have written laws.
The debate dragged on. Nothing was agreed, nothing decided. The future lay in another direction, and already Spain had found a new breed of soldiers for Christ. Stormtroopers who would specialize in the conquest of souls. They were the Jesuits who would spread the Catholic faith by argument. Rome had been winning souls in Latin America, but she'd been losing them in Europe to Luther and the Reformation. The Jesuits became the spearhead of the Catholic response, the Counter-Reformation. Loyola, in the north of Spain, is where the founder of the Jesuits was born, St. Ignatius. He hadn't always been so saintly. He'd been a rich young soldier, but after being wounded in a siege, he saw a vision and was inspired to fight a different battle. He gave up war to become a soldier for Christ. The conventional accounts of his life show him going through all the necessary experiences of a saint. Flagellation in front of the cross, trouble with devils, levitation to the surprise of fellow students, and, more important, the forming of a circle of friends who had become the new order of Jesuits. His friends followed him in his spiritual exercises, designed to devote each man to Christ's work, partly by concentrating the mind on certain unpleasant alternatives.
Smell in imagination the fumes of sulfur and the stench of filth and corruption. Taste in imagination all the bitterness of tears and melancholy and a gnawing conscience. Feel in imagination the heat of the flames that play on and burn the souls.
The Protestant reformers had recently found much to criticize in the Roman Catholic priesthood. The Jesuits were evidence of Catholic reform. Their almost military obedience was offered by Ignatius to the Pope himself. They were to be the Pope's own elite corps in the struggle for men's souls. The struggle became increasingly bitter. A painting of the next century saw the contest for souls as a fishing competition. Many people had hoped that the two boats, Catholic and Protestant, might draw closer together now that both sides were interested in reform. Both, after all, shared one common task, getting the souls on board. And recently the Protestants seemed to have been rather better at that. But any hope of compromise was ended by the Catholics at the Great Council of Trent, which established the idea of Counter-Reformation. From now on, a Catholic soul was made to seem as different from a Protestant one as could possibly be, and as self-confidently different as the new face of Rome herself. The new St. Peter's was begun in the immoral days of the Renaissance popes. It was to be completed in the strict Rome of the Counter-Reformation. Everyone, by now, was becoming indignant at the Church's recent past. one of the young men joining the Jesuit order here in Rome, did so when he discovered, to his horror, that he was the son of a priest, that he was the grandson of a bishop, and that both his mother and his grandmother were nuns. With such a background, reform acquires an exciting edge. Puritanism becomes unusually attractive, and Rome was fast becoming puritanical. The Vatican's naked statues had delighted both Michelangelo and the popes of the Renaissance, but now they had to be made decent, with old Adam's fig leaf, which they still wear today. Even Michelangelo's Pietà was criticized.
Pietà? That inventor of obscenities, Michelangelo, is concerned only with art, not with piety.
Catholic art was now going to concern itself with piety in the most schoolmasterly fashion. The Jesuits commissioned this sculpture in which every pretty detail carries its message. A cherub tears up the work of the Protestant reformer Zwingli. Martin Luther's books are crushed underfoot. Heresy is at its final gasp. The Vatican had recently set up a department for propagating the faith, in Latin, propaganda fidei, from which we get our modern word propaganda. The Jesuits made much of the new flamboyant Baroque style, well suited to propaganda. In this Jesuit church, the ceiling is full of a swarm, it's the only word, of flying saints, any one of whom could speak on a Catholic sinner's behalf to Christ. It's a pointed denial of the Protestant claim that a Christian needs no middleman between himself and God. In the center, Christ carries his cross up towards his even more distant Father. And just below Christ, naturally, is the Jesuit saint whom this particular church in Rome honors, Ignatius of Loyola. The great climax of Baroque propaganda in Rome is St. Peter's itself. This operatic self-confidence deliberately exalts St. Peter, in itself a rebuke to the Protestants, because Catholics regard Peter as the first pope. St. Peter's throne, surrounded by an explosion of gilded saints and cherubs, is watched over benignly by the Holy Spirit. The elaborate tomb of St. Ignatius is in the earliest of the Jesuit churches in Rome, the Gesù. At its top, a cherub holds the world's largest piece of lapis lazuli, a semi-precious stone which is normally found in sizes more suitable for a ring or a brooch. It's shaped into a globe, announcing that the ambitions of the Jesuits were indeed global. To the side of the tomb, a sculpture spells out in more detail the message. A dusky king bows the knee to a lady with the lamp of Catholic truth. The man who led this part of the Jesuit effort, carrying the faith to places that were not yet Christian, was St. Francis Xavier. He'd been a friend of St. Ignatius ever since they were students together in Paris. And where Cortes had sailed west to spread Christianity by the sword, Xavier would now go east with nothing but persuasion as a weapon. He became known as El Conquistador de Animas, the conqueror of souls. In India, Jesuits were soon arguing with Muslim scholars at the court of the Indian emperor. Over the years, the Jesuits were much encouraged by the response of various emperors, but nothing came of it. The imperial interest in Christ had been partly, it turned out, in the hope of getting some Christian women for the harem. Things went rather better in Japan. For a while in the 16th century, these islands welcomed European missionaries along with the European merchants. The Japanese were much amused by the strange men who came from the sea, but they weren't unfriendly. After Xavier's own visit, he was able to claim 1,000 converts. Eventually, as many as 300,000 Japanese may have been converted by the missionaries. It really seemed as if the saints and the Virgin Mary might be going to earn their Japanese features. But the tide turned when the Japanese converts began to be brutally done to death by their own countrymen. It was one of the very rare occasions since ancient Rome that Christians had been persecuted by anyone other than rival Christians. And so the East went back to its own ways, as if the Jesuits had never arrived. Today, a mere handful of Christians in Asia are the only living result of all the Jesuit efforts in the East. In that area, their Baroque self-confidence had come to nothing. It's a sad irony, but one that's all too familiar in Christian history, that the message of love seems to be most quickly learnt when it is preached with the sword. The Jesuit failure in the East was in contrast to the apparently total success of the brutal Spanish crusade to the West. The whole of Latin America became ostensibly Christian. There, it really did seem that all the peoples of the New World were on their knees to the lamp of Catholic truth. The Virgin of Guadalupe does indeed live in the hearts of millions of people. As a result of the Christian conquest, Latin America now accounts for more than 40% of all the Roman Catholics in the world. Today, the Virgin is to be seen in the open air for the first time for centuries. The Spanish filled in the Emperor Moctezuma's lake and built for the Virgin a church. For over 300 years it has subsided, one of Moctezuma's slower revenges, until it's no longer a fitting home for Mexico's best-loved image. Slowly, by perfectly contrived magic, the Virgin slides from her gold frame. She's attended by leaders of the church in what was once Spanish America. The high clerics here are still more Spanish than Indian, after centuries in which a Spanish minority have ruled the original inhabitants. And yet, the Virgin Mother of God, whom the conquistadors brought with them, has always been not only accepted, but loved by all Mexicans. Even though, from the very first domination of millions of Indians by a handful of Europeans, race was inevitably a barrier, a dividing line. In the central or Aztec part of Mexico, the problem of race was solved by an early miracle. This hill, which now overlooks Mexico City, the hill of Guadalupe, had been sacred to a goddess Tonantzin, who herself was the Virgin Mother of several other gods. But in 1531, an Aztec convert to Christianity was up here when he saw a vision. A beautiful lady, dressed in rich clothes, appeared to him and told him in his own language that she was the Virgin Mary. And she added, and this was the essential detail, that she was one of his own kind. Well, he asked how he could prove that he had seen her, and she told him to gather all the flowers on his hilltop. He did so, he put them in his cloak, and he carried them to the local bishop. And when he came to tip them out of his cloak to the bishop, the miraculous image of the Virgin was found to be imprinted in the cloth. And so today the bells ring out in the modern basilica to welcome to our new home the Virgin who reconciled the Indians to Christianity. Because, as she said, she was one of their own kind, an Indian like themselves, the Aztec Virgin of Guadalupe. Outside the new basilica, Indians dance while they wait for the dignitaries to leave. Later they'll go into the church themselves to attend Mass and to pay their respects to their own Virgin. These people descend from the Indians the Spaniards conquered, and their banner combines Christ with Tenochtitlan, the old Aztec name for Mexico City. At the time of the conquest, a group of Aztec Indians were taken by one of Cortes' lieutenants to work the land in the southernmost part of Mexico, in what is now Guatemala. In this greater isolation, the Indians were free to adapt Christianity. If you ask these people their religion, they'll tell you they're Christian. But this man is also a witch doctor. He's on his way to visit the local idol, Pascual Abach. The idol stands on top of a hill above Chichicastenango. At his shrine, the witch doctor will pray to all the gods: the god of the earth, the god of water, the god of fire, and to all the Christian saints he can think of.
Permacinse Bector Besercot Vacrios, Cacosa, Dios. Cao Cristo en Tatomaso, Chanso Sepo, Chipcherhan, Jesus. Cao Senor San Juan, Senor San Pedro, San José, Somos and Catinas Fishing. Si Pachuel Clafmund, Si Pasel Fridas Vidos, Berebesamon, Pesca. Ay Dios, Mishano Cristian, Ayosukin. Maxik Becocar Moncho, Hanakamenak Boyar, Kichawapor, Wan, Cahuatas, Cantas de Baido, Lachnila Tersinki. Subpitical Hik, Melartico, Perdon, Senor. Don Pascual Mont, Cab Christ, Jesus, Santo Tomaso, Chanso Sipish, Pesca. Maxito.
The god needs strength, like the Aztec god of the sun. He's offered alcohol to make him strong. And the same pick-me-up suits the god of fire. The whole hilltop is a sacred place, as near as you can get to the sky. From here, the smoke will carry prayers and messages up to the gods above. But Pascual Abach is not satisfied with alcohol, with smoke.
Veros que perdón que Señor chapna. Ego chocal knop which if you sat me chairman. Señor perdón moon, eros vapor, corrigal chachis, herbedio, cacho choptar, del swast tour, that transfer.
Below the hilltop shrine of Pascual Abach, in the town of Chichicastenango, a god who has arrived more recently has taken up his residence. The Indians, very sensibly, pray to all the gods they can. And just in case the smoke at the top of the hill hasn't perfectly conveyed their message, they'll repeat the same ritual and the same requests at the door of the Christian god. The Sunday market takes place in front of the church, and many of the prayers, here as anywhere else, enlist God's help in the day's business. Christ, in his own church, is open to everyone. But the Indians have also taken him into the privacy of their own homes. Here the brotherhoods meet for Christian worship, to pray in private to their chosen saints, unseen by any outsiders, exclusively Indian. Immediately after this private Christian ceremony, the brotherhoods leave their various houses to join with the rest of Chichicastenango in the normal Sunday service of any Roman Catholic community. In church, they'll take part in the Mass, conducted by a priest from Spain.
Santo eres en verdad. Ahora concédele la paz y la unidad, tú que vives y reinas por los siglos de los siglos. Amén. La paz del Señor sea siempre con vosotros. Y con tu espíritu. Daos la paz como hermanos. La paz como hermanos.
On a normal Sunday, but once or twice a year each brotherhood has its own special Sunday. It's an occasion of great festivity, a rare day out for the saints, who are brought from the Brotherhood's own house to be blessed in the Catholic Church. One of the saints to be blessed is a crusading knight on a horse. He's St. James, the patron saint of the Christians who drove the Moors from Spain. As part of the general festivities, while the saints are carried round the town, huge masked figures join the procession, well-tamed versions of the rough Spanish conquistadors. Here, in a pleasantly humorous form, are the pale faces and the beards of the men who brought to Latin America a new faith. A faith which the Indians made very much their own. Every Sunday, the floor of the church becomes a blaze of candles after the Spanish priest has left. In small groups, the Indians return to carry on with their own prayers. To say a prayer and to light a candle is a familiar part of Catholic worship anywhere in the world. But here there are details which you won't find elsewhere. Small actions which need to be done in these Christian surroundings with a little caution. White flowers are sometimes used to wish disaster to an enemy. If so, a dash of alcohol can only improve the curse. Hardly a proper subject, it might be thought, for a prayer in a Christian church. But in a place like Latin America, it's difficult for the conquest of men's souls to be as complete as the conquest of their bodies.
Truth to tell, it is war and warriors that really persuade the Indians to give up their idols, their bestial rites and abominable sacrifices, and only then do they, of their own free will and consent, more quickly receive, listen to and believe our preachers and accept the gospel and baptism, which is what Christianity and the faith consist of.
In the next program of the Christians, Plymouth Plantation in America. It was here that the Pilgrim Fathers first landed when they fled from religious persecution in Europe. Today, the original settlement has been reconstructed as a living museum, reminding modern Americans of their earliest heritage. But it was not as idyllic as it looks. Many of those early groups who came to America in search of tolerance soon proved intolerant themselves.